Her father set the marriage contract on the breakfast table, the way other men set down a winning hand, and slid it across the linen until the corner of it touched her plate. "You will marry Mr. Garrow before the lilies are done flowering," Sir Cornelius Fairfax said. "I have given my word, and my word is not a thing I take back to please a girl." Rosalind did not touch the paper. Through the long window the July light came down hot and yellow over the area steps, and there, where she had seen him 3 mornings running, sat the beggar the footman chased off twice a week, his back against the iron railing, a crust turning over and over in fingers far too clean for the rest of him. She would sooner wed that ragged stranger on the steps, she thought, than the man whose name now sat inked beside her own. What she could not have known, watching him through the warm glass, was the name buried under all that road dust, or how high above her own it stood. "You have gone pale," her father observed, buttering his bread. "Garrow will think you missish. Garrow may think what entertains him." She lifted her chin. The morning smelled of warm beeswax, and yesterday's roses going soft in their bowl, and underneath it, faint and metallic, the smell of her own fear, which she despised. "I have met him twice, Papa. Once he counted the silver with his eyes. Once he counted me the same way. He counted 3,000 a year and a house in Bruton Street," Sir Cornelius said, "which is more than your face has earned us in 2 seasons, miss, for all the milliner's bills." The cruelty of it landed exactly where he aimed it. She felt the heat climb her throat and refused to let it reach her face. Below the window the beggar tilted his head, as though he had heard, though she was certain he could not have, and the crust went still in his hand. "And if I refuse him?" Her father set down his knife. It made a small, final click against the plate, the sound of a door that has decided to stay shut. "Then you will refuse him from a hired room in some watering place where no one knows your mother's people, and you will refuse him on whatever I choose to send you, which will not be much. I am not a young man, Rosalind. I will see you settled before the autumn, settled high, or I will see you gone where your sulks cannot cost me anything further." He folded his napkin. "He calls at 3. Wear the amber." He admired you in amber. He rose and left her with the contract and the long bar of sunlight and the small cooling pot of chocolate, and Rosalind sat very straight until the door closed, and then she pressed both hands flat to the table to stop them shaking. The clock on the mantel ticked into the silence. 3 o'clock. She had until 3 o'clock to become a woman who could not be sold. Below her, on the steps, the beggar bit into his crust at last, and watched the door he had been chased from, and waited with the patience of a man who had nowhere in the world he was required to be. She found him still there an hour later, when she had pinned on a plain bonnet and gone out through the kitchen passage with the cook's startled miss. Trailing behind her like a dropped ribbon, the mews lane ran hot and narrow, smelling of straw and horse, and the sweetish rot of a cabbage leaf trodden into the cobbles, and the beggar sat where the lane met the open street with his long legs stretched before him, and his eyes shut against the glare. "You are on my father's steps every other morning," Rosalind said. He opened his eyes. They were grey, and clear, and entirely unhurried, and they took her in, bonnet, gloves, the good muslin she had not thought to change, with a calm that no man in rags had any business owning. "I am on the public stones at the foot of your father's steps," he corrected. "There is a difference, and your footman and I have discussed it at length. You speak very well for a man who sleeps on stones. I sleep where the stones are warm." He inclined his head, and the gesture had something in it she could not place, something that belonged in a drawing-room and not a gutter. "And you address me very directly for a young lady who came out through the scullery." She felt her face heat, and was glad of the bonnet's brim. "You watched me come out." "I watch everyone come and go. It is nearly my whole occupation." His mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You came out fast, and you came out angry, and you looked back twice at a house you were in no hurry to return to." "I have begged on a great many doorsteps. I know the look of someone leaving one for good, even when they have not yet admitted it to themselves. The accuracy of it was almost unbearable." She studied him properly then. The dark hair gone to disorder, the 3 days' beard, the coat that had been good once and was now a ruin of dust and mending, and the hands, which she kept returning to, broad and brown and clean at the nails, a gentleman's hands wearing a beggar's grime, like a costume he had forgotten to fit. He let her look. That was the strangest part. He sat under her examination as though it cost him nothing at all. "What is your name?" "Gabriel," he said, after a pause she would remember later. "Gabriel will do. It is not your whole name." "No," he agreed pleasantly. "It is not." A cart rattled past the lane's mouth and threw up a cloud of grit that hung gold in the light, and he did not so much as blink at it. "And Fairfax is not your whole trouble, Miss Fairfax, or you would not have come down to a stranger in the dirt to ask his name when you have a wedding to dress for at 3. She went cold and still. "You heard. Voices carry through an open window in summer. Your father has a carrying voice." He drew his legs in, unfolding upward in one slow movement, until he stood a full head above her, and even ragged, even reeking faintly of the road, he filled the narrow lane the way a man fills a doorway he was born to stand in. "I am sorry for it. 3,000 a year is a great deal of money to be measured against. It is not, however, a great deal to be." And there it was again, the impossible refinement, the dry, exact turn of phrase, dropped into the gutter like a sovereign into a beggar's cap. Rosalind opened her mouth and shut it, and walked away from him very fast, because an idea had arrived in her chest fully formed and terrible, and she needed to be somewhere her own face could not give it away. Mr. Silas Garrow arrived at 3 precisely, and Rosalind, who had refused the amber and worn a sprigged white instead out of pure contrariness, watched him hand his hat to the footman as though the man were furniture, and understood with perfect clarity that her father had not exaggerated his fortune and had said nothing whatever about his soul. He was beautiful. That was the cruelty of it. He had a fine straight nose and a wide clean brow, and the sort of mouth poets pretend to admire, and when he bowed over her hand his lips did not touch her glove, and his eyes came up to hers already certain of the answer to every question he had not yet asked. "Miss Fairfax, you did not wear the amber." "I had not understood it was a condition of the contract, sir." "Everything is a condition of the contract," he said, and smiled, and it was a handsome smile, and it did not warm 1 degree of him. He turned to her father. "Cornelius, the papers are in order?" "In order, and waiting on the lady's signature." Her father had the bright, anxious heartiness of a man whose creditor has come to call wearing the face of a son-in-law. Tea was brought. The drawing-room was close and over-warm, the windows shut against the street noise so that the air sat thick with the smell of hot wax, and the lilies her mother had loved and her father now grew only because they were expensive. Rosalind poured. Her hand was perfectly steady. She had decided, somewhere between the mews and the morning room, to let nothing of herself show until she knew the shape of the trap entire. "Your father tells me you are spirited," Garrow said, accepting his cup. "I find spirit charming in a girl, and tedious in a wife. I am confident you will know the difference by Michaelmas. You are confident of a great many things, Mr. Garrow." "I am confident of the things I have bought." He said it gently, into his tea, and her father laughed too loudly, and Rosalind set down the pot before it could betray her. "Your father's note falls due in September. I hold it. I hold the mortgage on the Hampshire land your grandfather settled, which your father borrowed against without troubling to mention it to you, I think." He glanced at Sir Cornelius, who had gone the colour of tallow. No, he had not mentioned it. "There is no shame in debt, Miss Fairfax. Half the great houses in this kingdom are mortgaged to men like me. There is only the question of how it is paid." He looked at her then, fully, and she felt the look move over her like a hand checking a horse's teeth. Some debts are paid in coin, some in connection. You are the connection. The clock ticked. A fly battered itself against the closed window with a small, frantic sound, again and again, unable to understand the glass. "And if the connection declines," Rosalind said, "you will sell my father's roof from under him." "I will sell it from under him by Lady Day," Garrow agreed, "and I will not be uncivil about it. Drink your tea, Miss Fairfax. We are to be married. We may as well be comfortable." He smiled again, that beautiful empty smile, and somewhere below the window a man with grey eyes and clean hands had heard her father's carrying voice through the summer glass, and Rosalind thought of him, and the terrible idea in her chest unfolded one further dreadful inch. She did not sign that afternoon. She pleaded the heat and a megrim, and Garrow allowed it the way a cat allows a mouse a yard of floor, and went away promising to return on Friday with the license, and her father followed her to the foot of the stairs hissing that she would ruin them all, that the man held everything, that there was no other suitor in England who would take a baronet's daughter with a mortgage where her dowry should be. "No gentleman, you mean," Rosalind said. "No gentleman, no cit, no half-pay captain, no one." He gripped the newel post. In the shadow of the stairs he looked suddenly old and frightened, and she felt a treacherous pang of pity she could not afford. "You will marry Garrow, Rosalind, or you will marry no one, and I will not keep you to grow into an ape-leader at my expense. Those are the only two roads, do you hear me? There is no third." "I hear you, Papa," she said, and went up to her room and shut the door and stood with her back against it while the third road bloomed before her bright and impossible as a field of poppies. There was a way to be worth nothing to Silas Garrow. There was a way to make the connection he was buying not exist. A married woman could not be married again. A woman already wed to the lowest creature in London, wed past all undoing, wed where no mortgage could reach and no license could mend, was a debt Garrow could not collect in the coin he wanted. She would have to ruin herself so thoroughly that ruin became a wall. Her maid found her at the window an hour later, watching the steps. "You'll wear a groove in that glass, miss," said Suki, who had been with her since the country and feared nothing in London but the price of ribbon. She set down the can of hot water. "And cook says the beggar's back, the grey-eyed one. Wouldn't take the broken meats off her this morning, said he'd not eat what was meant for the dogs, if it was all one to her. Cheek of it, from a man with no shoes." She tutted, plumping a pillow. "Mind, he said it that pretty she gave him the good cold mutton instead. There's beggars and beggars. That one talks like he's doing you the favour." "Does he?" Rosalind said softly, and did not turn from the window. "Like a duke down on his luck, cook says, only with worse linen." Suki laughed at her own joke and bustled out, and Rosalind stood very still, because the maid had set a word ringing in the quiet room that she could not make stop. Like a duke. It meant nothing. Cook was a romantic, and the beggar was a beggar. But the hands. But the way he had stood. But the cool grey amusement of him, sitting in the dirt as though the dirt were a chair he had chosen. It did not signify. A beggar was exactly what she needed. The lower he was, the higher the wall. She waited until the house slept, until her father's snores came regular through the wall, and the watchman had called the hour and gone on. And then she went down through the scullery again, in her plainest cloak, with her mother's small pearl drops knotted into her handkerchief, and let herself out into the warm blue dark of the summer street. He was on the steps. Of course he was on the steps. The night had not cooled the stones, and he sat against the railing with his head tipped back and his eyes shut. And without opening them, he said, "You will catch your reputation a chill, Miss Fairfax, walking out at midnight to a man in rags." "My reputation," she said, "is precisely what I have come to discuss." Her heart was going so hard, she was sure he could hear it. The street smelled of dust laid by the evening's brief rain, and night stalks from someone's area garden, and the river, faintly, far off and green. A single lamp guttered at the corner and threw his shadow long up the railings. "I have a proposal for you, an honest one. It will sound mad, and I beg you to hear all of it before you laugh." He opened his eyes. In the lamplight, the grey of them had gone nearly black, and they were not laughing at all. "I have heard a great many mad things on these stones," he said. "I rarely laugh at them. Sit, if you will. The step is warmer than it looks, and you are shaking." She did not sit. She stood over him with the handkerchief twisted to a rope in her fist, and said it all in one breath before her courage could turn coward. "My father means to sell me to a man who holds his debts, by Friday. There is no escaping it except one way. A married woman cannot be married. If I were already wed to someone with nothing, someone Garrow could not threaten, and could not buy, and could not even be bothered to ruin, then the bargain breaks. There is no connection to purchase. There is only a beggar's wife, worth precisely nothing to anyone, which is the only thing in the world I have left to be." Her voice cracked on the last of it, and she hated the crack and went on through it. "I have my mother's pearls. I have a little money of my own that Garrow does not know of. I am asking you to marry me. By license, by Thursday, before he comes. I am asking you to let me defy my father by becoming your wife, and then I will ask nothing of you ever again. And you may have the pearls, and go." For a long moment he said nothing at all. The lamp hissed. Somewhere a cat went over a wall. Gabriel looked up at her from the warm stone, with his clean hands loose on his knees, and across his ruined face moved something complicated and quick. Surprise, and something darker that might have been pain, and last of all, settling over both, a strange and quiet attention, as though she had asked him a question he had been waiting his whole life to be asked, and had never once expected to hear from a girl in a midnight cloak. "You do not know my name," he said. "My whole name. You do not know one true thing about me." "I know you would not eat the dog's meat," Rosalind said. "I know you stood up when I came near, the way no one does for a beggar. I know you talk like a sermon, and watch like a magistrate, and that you are the only creature in this city my father cannot use against me, because you have nothing he wants, and you are afraid of nothing he is." She drew a breath that shook. "I do not need to know your name. I need it on a register beside mine, where it cannot be scratched out." He rose. He did it slowly, unfolding to his full height, so that she had to tip her head to hold his eyes, and the dust smell of him and the night stocks and her own thundering pulse all ran together into one impossible moment. For just an instant she thought he would refuse, would laugh after all, would tell her to go home and marry her wealthy man and stop troubling honest paupers. Instead he looked down at her with that quiet, terrible attention, and something in him seemed to come to a decision he had been a very long time avoiding. "Thursday," Gabriel said. "By license. You will want a witness who will not talk." A pause, and then, so low she almost missed it, with the ghost of that not-quite smile. "And you will keep the pearls. A man should be able to give his wife something, even a man with no shoes." She should have heard it then. The give, the his wife, the way he said it like a vow and not a bargain. She heard only that he had said yes. She put out her hand, and he took it, and his grip was warm and certain and entirely too sure. The clasp of a man closing a treaty rather than begging a favor. And behind them, the dark house slept on, unaware that its daughter had just bound herself past, all undoing to a stranger in the dirt, who held her cold fingers in his clean ones, and looked at the shut door she meant to defy, and did not tell her, even then, exactly whose word she had just taken instead of her father's. The license cost more than she had thought, and the getting of it was worse than the cost. She had imagined it a private thing, a clerk, a signature. A sum slid across a counter. Instead, Thursday came up hot and white over the rooftops, and she stood in the close brick shade of a court off Doctors' Commons, with her veil drawn down and her mother's pearls warm against her collarbone, and watched Gabriel walk toward her out of the glare as though the morning had been arranged for his convenience. He had washed. That was the first thing she saw, and it stopped her breath in her throat. The road dust was gone from his jaw, and the 3 days' beard with it, and though the coat was the same ruin of mending and the boots still gaped at one seam, the face above the rags had changed entirely. A hard, clean line of cheek and brow, a mouth that in the daylight looked less like a sermon and more like a held secret. "You shaved," she said, foolishly, before she could stop herself. A man should come tidy to his own wedding. He stopped before her. He smelled of cheap soap and, under it, very faintly, of something better bay, she thought, or cedar, the ghost of a shaving cake no beggar could afford. Even a beggar, perhaps especially a beggar. It is the one morning he is permitted to look as though he expects something of the day. And do you? Expect something. His grey eyes moved over the veil, as if it were not there. "I expect," he said, "that you will go through with this, and I expect that you will regret the half of it before the bells stop, and I expect to stand by you through the regret as well as the rest, because that is what the word means, whatever brought us to it." He offered his arm. The gesture was so natural, so wholly assured, that she had taken it before she remembered he was a man who slept on stones. "Come, the witness is waiting, and he is not a patient creature." The witness was a thin grey man named Pelham, who kept his hat on indoors and watched Gabriel with an expression Rosalind could not read. Not the contempt one gave a pauper, but something nearer caution, nearer the careful blankness of a servant in a room where he has been told to see nothing. He stood at the back of the dim stone chamber where the surrogate waited, and he signed his name when he was bidden, and he did not once meet her eye. It went very fast. That was the part she had not braced for. A few words in Latin, a few in English, the surrogate's voice running them off like a man counting coins, and then a question put to her, and her own voice answering "I will" into the cool echoing dark, and a question put to Gabriel, and his answer coming low and certain and without the smallest hesitation, "I will," as though he had rehearsed it across a great many sleepless nights. The surrogate had spoken his name once, over the Latin, too low and quick to catch, and it stood now in the register above her own signature, a line she had kept herself, on purpose, from reading, for she had promised to ask nothing of him, and his name was the first thing she would not ask. He had no ring. She had expected none, but he took her bare left hand in both of his, and turned it palm up, and pressed his thumb once to the place where a ring would sit, slow and deliberate, a vow made in the absence of the thing that ought to carry it. "I have nothing to give you that the world would recognize," he said only to her, under the surrogate's droning, "so I will give you my word, which is worth a great deal more than the world has yet been told. You are my wife, Rosalind, from this morning. Whatever you came here to make me, you have made me also that." She did not weep. She had promised herself she would not. But her throat ached with the strangeness of being spoken to as though she mattered, by the one person in London who stood to gain nothing by it, and she had to look hard at the worn stone floor until the ache passed. Outside, in the white blaze of the court, Pelham touched his hat to Gabriel. Touched it, the small precise courtesy of a man acknowledging a superior, and was gone into the crowd before Rosalind could wonder properly at it. "Your witness," she said, "looked at you as though you owed him money." On the contrary. Gabriel watched the grey man's hat bob away among the clerks and porters. "He looked at me as though I owed him an explanation. They are not the same debt, though they are often confused." He turned the not-quite smile on her. "Are you hungry? It is customary, I am told, to feed the bride. I cannot stretch to a wedding breakfast, but I know a stall by the river where the pies are honest, and the woman who keeps it does not ask questions, which on this particular morning is the rarer luxury of the two." And there it was. The dry turn of it dropped so lightly into the heat, and Rosalind heard herself laugh. A startled, cracked sound she had not meant to make, the first laugh in 4 days, and she pressed her gloved fingers to her mouth, as if to catch it back. He saw. Something eased at the corner of his grey eyes, some small, private satisfaction, as though feeding her that laugh had been worth more to him than the pie. "You find that amusing?" he said. "I find it astonishing," she said, "that a man with no shoes has opinions on the rarity of luxuries." "A man with no shoes has nothing but opinions. They are the one estate the bailiffs cannot enter." He drew her hand more firmly through his arm. "Eat with me, wife. Then I will walk you to the corner of your father's street, and no further, and you will go in and be exactly as you were yesterday, and no one in that house will know until you choose to tell them that the thing is already done and cannot be undone. That is the whole of your defense, that it is finished before they know to prevent it. Guard it. Spend it when it costs them most." She ate the pie. It was honest, as he had promised, hot and greasy and good, and the river ran green and slow and stinking beyond the stall, and gulls cried over the wherries, and she stood in her wedding muslin beside her ragged husband in the summer noise, and thought that she had never in her life felt so far from everything she knew, nor, strangely, so safe. That feeling lasted exactly until Friday. Garrow came at 11, a full 4 hours before he was expected, and he came with a man in black at his shoulder and a paper in his hand. And from the top of the stairs, Rosalind heard the front door open to him, and heard her father's voice climb at once into that bright, anxious heartiness, and underneath it, cold and level and carrying, Garrow's reply. "Where is she?" "Cornelius. She is dressing. She will be down directly." "You are very early, sir. May I offer you? You may offer me my wife's hand and a witnessed signature, which is what I came for, and which you assured me on Wednesday I would have by today." A pause. The black-coated man's boots crossed the hall. "I have brought my own attorney. I find contracts go more smoothly when the lady has fewer afternoons to think." Rosalind came down the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, in the sprigged white, because it was the dress she had been married in, and it gave her a secret courage to wear it into this room. Garrow turned as she entered the morning room, and his beautiful empty face did not change, but his eyes went over her once. Head to hem, that horse coper's appraisal, and she felt the old crawl of it, and did not flinch. "Miss Fairfax, you are recovered from your megrim." "Quite recovered. Mr. Garrow, good. Sentiment is tiresome, but a sick fiancé is worse." He set the paper on the table. The same linen, the contract again with its inked names. The attorney laid a travelling standish beside it and uncapped the ink, and the small wet smell of it cut through the lilies. "Sit, sign. We are wed by the end of the month, and your father keeps his roof, and we may all of us stop performing this tedious play of reluctance." "I will not sign it," Rosalind said. The fly was at the window again, or another fly, battering the hot glass. Her father made a small strangled sound. Garrow only tilted his head, the patience of a man who has heard the word no from people who could not afford it. "You will," he said. "You misunderstand your position, which is natural in a girl, so I will be plain. There is no door out of this room that does not have my name written across it. I hold the September note. I hold the Hampshire mortgage. I hold, since Tuesday," he glanced at her father, who had gone grey, "the bills your father has been quietly settling at 3 houses of business with money he does not have, which I have bought up at a discount precisely so that I might hold them too. He is mine, Miss Fairfax, to the last button on his coat. The only question that remains open in the whole of his affairs is whether his daughter comes with the estate or is sold off it. Sign, and you are a rich man's wife. Refuse, and you are a beggar by Michaelmas. Those are the terms. They are not negotiable, and your reluctance does not move them by a farthing. It was the word that did it. A beggar. He had reached for the lowest thing he could name to frighten her with, And he had named, without knowing it, the one thing she had already made herself, and the absurd glory of it rose in her so suddenly that she had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing in his beautiful face. "I am afraid, Mr. Garrow," she said, very clearly, "that I cannot be a rich man's wife. You are tiresome when you are arch." "I am not being arch. I am being a married woman." She watched the words land. She watched the attorney's pen stop in the air. She watched her father's hand close white-knuckled on the back of a chair. "I was married yesterday morning, by license at Doctors' Commons, with a witness whose name is on the register beside my own. The thing is done, and it is recorded, and it cannot be scratched out. I am not Miss Fairfax. I have not been Miss Fairfax since 11 o'clock on Thursday. So you see there is nothing here for you to buy, sir, because the connection you came to purchase belongs already to another man, and you cannot wed where the law has been before you." The silence that followed had a weight to it, a held-breath density. The lilies and the ink and the small frantic insect all suspended in it together. Then her father said her name, once, low, in a voice she had never heard him use, a voice with the floor falling out of it, and Garrow turned his head slowly toward her, and for the first time since she had met him, the beautiful surface of his face cracked, and what showed underneath was not grief, and not even anger, but a cold and total reorganization. A man turning over a board to see what pieces remained. "To whom?" Garrow said. "That is not your affair." "To whom, madam?" He had not raised his voice. He never raised his voice. But he had taken a step toward her, and her father had not moved to stop him, and the attorney had quietly set down his pen as a man does who senses the contract has left his keeping. "You are a baronet's daughter without a feather to fly with, and there is not a gentleman in England who would take you against my interest, knowing what stands behind you. So you have not married a gentleman. You have married down and fast, and in secret, which means you have married low. What is he? A clerk? A drawing master? Some half-pay nobody who thought a baronet's blood worth the gamble?" His mouth thinned. "Tell me his name and his trade, and I will have the truth of him by nightfall. And I promise you, Mrs., whoever you now are, I promise you there is no man so low that I cannot make his life a thing he will beg to be rid of, and you with it." "His name is Gabriel," she said, and lifted her chin, and gave him the only weapon she had, which was that it was no weapon at all. "He has no trade. He has no money. He has no house, no family I know of, no friends, and no shoes worth the mending. He begs on the public stones at the foot of my father's steps, where your own carriage has passed him twice this week. I married a beggar, Mr. Garrow. I married the lowest creature in this parish, on purpose, with my eyes open, precisely so that you would have nothing left to ruin. You cannot bankrupt a man who has nothing. You cannot shame a man who sleeps in the open. You came to buy a connection, and I have spent it on a pauper, and there is no court in this kingdom that will give it back to you." Her voice shook on the last of it, and she let it shake. "So sell my father's roof. Do it today. It will not buy you me." For a long moment Garrow simply looked at her. Then, and this was the thing she would turn over and over in the long hours after, the small wrong note in the whole catastrophe, he smiled. Not the empty, handsome smile, a smaller one, private, almost appreciative. The smile of a card player who has been dealt a surprise he rather respects. "A beggar," he said softly. "On these particular steps." He glanced once at the window, at the area railing beyond it, at the warm stones where a grey-eyed man had sat 3 mornings running. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation, and under the calculation. Just for an instant, something that might almost have been doubt. "How very enterprising of you, Mrs. Gabriel, and how very convenient that the lowest creature in the parish should happen to be sitting at the foot of the one house in London where his lowness would be most useful." He turned to her father. "Cornelius, have you looked at this beggar?" "Truly looked?" "Aye. The footmen chase him off. I have not." "Garrow, I knew nothing of this, I swear to you. The girl has run mad. The girl, Garrow said, is the only person in this room who has acted with any sense at all. Which is what troubles me. He took up his hat. He left the contract lying on the table, the ink drying unused in the open standish, and that more than anything frightened Rosalind, that he would leave the paper behind as a thing no longer worth the carrying. At the door he paused and looked back at her, and the appraisal in his eyes had changed entirely. It was no longer the look a man gives a horse, but the look a man gives a lock he has just discovered is cleverer than he supposed. "I shall want to meet your husband," he said. "Your beggar. I find I am curious about him. A man does not sit 3 days on a baronet's steps eating the dog's meat for nothing, and your cook tells my coachman he would not eat the dog's meat, which is curiouser still. Beggars are not proud, Mrs. Gabriel. Pride is the one luxury they cannot keep. So either you have married the only proud beggar in England, or you have married something that is wearing a beggar the way a poacher wears the dark." He set his hat on his beautiful head. "I mean to find out which." "Good morning. Do not trouble to see me out. I know every door in this house, as I have told you. I own most of them." He was gone. The front door closed on him with a soft, expensive click, and her father sank into the chair he had been gripping and put his face in his hands, and Rosalind stood alone in the middle of the over-warm room, with her victory turning strange and cold in her chest. Because she had won. She had won. The connection was broken. The trap was sprung, and yet the man who had walked out had not walked out beaten. He had walked out interested. And the thing he was interested in was the one thing she had been carefully refusing to wonder about herself. "What have you done?" her father said into his hands. "What have you done? What have you done? He will sell us up before the week is out. He will see us in the street. Over a beggar, Rosalind, you have thrown us all into the gutter to spite me. Over a creature without a name, he has a name." "He has Gabriel," her father spat, lifting a ravaged face. "Gabriel what? Gabriel who? You stood in this room and could not give the man a surname. You married a thing off the stones, and you do not know the half of his name." He laughed, a dreadful broken sound. "You called him your wall. I heard you, all your fine talk of walls. Walls have foundations, girl. What do you know of what holds yours up?" And that, exactly that, was the question that had been sitting in her since the Mews Lane, since Gabriel will do. Since the witness who touched his hat to a pauper, and the soap that smelled faintly of cedar, and the way he had said my wife like a vow he had carried a long way to deliver. She had married a beggar to make a wall of his lowness. But she did not know, she realized, standing in the wreck of the morning, with the lilies dying in their bowl, whether she had built her wall upon the ground at all, or upon something else entirely, something deep and buried and rising, that she had not yet seen the shape of, and that Silas Garrow, with his card-player's smile, had just gone out into the summer to dig up. She found Gabriel that evening, not on the steps, but in the Mews Lane, in the violet dusk, sitting on an upturned crate behind the stable, with his long legs crossed at the ankle, and she came to him fast, with her cloak unfastened, and the whole of the day spilling out of her before she had reached him. "Garrow knows. He came this morning. He knows I am married. He knows it is to you." She stopped, breathing hard. The lane smelled of warm dung and crushed mint where someone had trodden a herb pot, and the swifts were screaming high and black over the rooftops. He is not angry. That is the worst of it. He is not angry. He is curious. He said, "He asked whether I had looked at you. He said a man does not sit 3 days on a baronet's steps for nothing. He means to find out who you are." Gabriel did not move at once. He sat in the failing light with his clean hands loose between his knees, and watched her, and something passed over his face that she had seen once before, that night on the steps, the dark, quick thing, under the calm. "Here and gone. And who?" he said quietly. "Did you tell him I am?" "A beggar. The truth, that you have nothing, and no name and no trade, and that is the whole point of you." She heard it as she said it, heard how it sounded, and a flush of shame went through her. "I do not mean, Gabriel. I do not mean it cruelly. It is your nothing that saves me. It is the most valuable thing anyone has ever given me, your nothing. I only," she faltered. He smiled when I said it. He smiled as though I had handed him a clue and not a wall, and I do not understand it, and I am frightened, and I have no one to ask but you. He rose from the crate. He came to stand before her in the violet dark, very tall, and he lifted one hand as if to touch her face, and then did not. Let it fall, and the not touching was somehow worse than a touch. "Listen to me," he said, low and even. "Whatever Garrow digs up, whatever he thinks he has found, you will come to me first. Before you believe it. Before you let it turn in you. Will you promise me that whatever the world tells you about the man you married, you will let the man himself answer it before you decide what it means? You are frightening me worse, not better. I know. Forgive me." His mouth did the thing that was nearly a smile, and this time there was no warmth in it, only a kind of grief. "I have spent a great deal of effort being no one, Rosalind. It has been the most peaceful labor of my life, the unmaking of my own name. I had thought to keep it up a while longer, but a clever man with a grudge has just set himself to undo in a fortnight what took me half a year to build, and I find," he looked at her, and the grief in his face was suddenly, nakedly tender, "I find I mind it now, when I did not mind it last week. Because last week there was no one it could hurt but me." "Mind what?" "Gabriel, your name. Tell me your name. Your whole name. I am your wife. I have a right to." But a door banged somewhere up the lane, and a stable boy came whistling round the corner, with a lantern swinging, and Gabriel stepped back from her into the shadow of the wall, with the smooth instant ease of a man long practiced at not being seen, and the moment broke like a dropped cup. By the time the boy and his bobbing light had passed, the grey-eyed man had folded himself back into stillness, beggar to the bone again, unreadable, and all he said, as she gathered her cloak to go, was, "Thursday's work cannot be undone. Hold to that. Whatever he finds, you are already mine and I am already yours. And that at least is true past any man's unmaking." A pause. "Go in. Your father will be wanting someone to blame, and better it be done tonight, while there is still a roof to do it under." She went. At the lane's mouth she looked back once, and he was watching her go, the way he had said he watched everyone, his whole occupation, but his face in the last of the light was not a beggar's face at all, and she carried the wrongness of it up through the scullery and into her sleepless room, the certainty, settling cold and sure in her chest, that she had not married down into safety, but sideways into something far larger than her father's debts, and that Silas Garrow had ridden off into the summer dusk to find out exactly how large, and would reach the bottom of it before she did. Sleep kept its distance, and the dawn that came in its place was the color of a bruise going yellow. Rosalind lay and listened to the house wake around her, the scullery maid raking the range, a milk cart on the cobbles, the Swifts already screaming their high summer circuits over the chimney pots, and she counted the hours since Thursday, the way a miser counts a hoard he fears to find short. 2 days married. 1 day discovered. And somewhere across the warming city a man with a card player's smile was turning over stones to find the foundation of her wall. Suki brought the hot water at 7, and the gossip with it, which was the more scalding of the two. "He's had men out, miss." She set the can down and crossed to fling the curtain wide on the white glare. "Mr. Garrow. Cook had it from the knife boy, who had it from the boot boy at the corner house. There's been a fellow asking up and down the mews since yesterday noon, asking the ostlers, asking the crossing sweeper, asking who's the beggar that sits the Fairfax steps, and where does he lie of a night, and has anyone seen him take his hat off?" She wrung the cloth, and her round face was troubled. "Folk talk for a shilling, miss, they've been talking. And the queer thing," she lowered her voice as if the wallpaper might carry it, Nobody knows. 3 days he's sat there, and not a soul can say where he came from nor what name he answers to past Gabriel. A beggar with no history. There's no such creature. Even the lowest of them has a parish. Did the man asking find that strange? He found it worth another shilling, by all accounts. Suki twitched the coverlet straight. I'll tell you what's strange, miss, since you'll have it. A beggar nobody knows is a beggar somebody's hiding. That's what my gran would say. You don't lose your whole name in this world. You spend it on purpose, or someone spends it for you. It was so near to what Gabriel himself had said, the unmaking of my own name, the most peaceful labor of my life, that Rosalind's hands went cold around the warm china. She turned to the window. The steps below were empty. The warm stone where he had sat 3 mornings running held only a wedge of early sun and a sparrow worrying at a crumb, and the emptiness of the place struck her under the ribs like a mist stare. He is not there. No, miss, nor was he at first light, cook says. First morning in 4, he's not kept his post. Suki gathered the slops. Maybe he's gone to ground, the asking having got too warm. Sensible, if so. A man with something to hide and a clever gentleman hunting it does well to be elsewhere. She paused at the door, and some country shrewdness moved behind her plain face. Only I'd have thought, miss. A husband. I'd have thought a husband, having heard the hunt was up, might come to his wife and not run off from her. Unless what he's running from is bigger than what you married him to escape. She bobbed and was gone, and left the sentence behind her in the bright room like a coal dropped on a carpet, smouldering. Rosalind stood at the glass a long while, with the steam rising off the can untouched, and watched the empty steps, and felt the wall she had built so cleverly turn under her hands into something she could not name. Not a wall at all, but a door, standing ajar onto a dark she had not chosen and could not see the end of. She dressed without Suki's help and went down, and found her father already at the breakfast table he had ruled like a winning hand 4 mornings before. He ruled nothing now. He sat with the curtains half drawn against the heat and a cup of cold chocolate skinning over at his elbow, and he did not look up when she came in. He has not foreclosed, she said. It was not a comfort, it was a question. Not yet. Her father's voice had gone to gravel overnight. He has done worse. He has done nothing. A man who means to ruin you sends his attorney. A man who is amused by you sends no one, and lets you sit in the heat, wondering when the axe falls, and that is far the crueler, because you cannot dress for it. He turned a letter over in his fingers, not a legal letter she saw, but a square of good cream paper, folded and sealed with grey wax. This came at 6. By hand. From him. What does it say? Read it. It is addressed to you in any case. He is very correct, our Mr. Garrow. He addresses the married woman. He pushed it across the linen the exact way he had pushed the marriage contract, until its corner touched her plate, and the echo of it turned her stomach. He wishes the pleasure of your company. And your husband's. Rosalind broke the grey seal. The hand inside was as beautiful and as empty as the man's face, Mrs. Gabriel. I find I cannot rest easy in a bargain half understood. Do me the honour of bringing your husband to dine, Thursday next, at Bruton Street. I should so like to make the acquaintance of the gentleman who has cost me a wife. Pray do not refuse. Refusal in your present circumstances would be a luxury, and luxuries, as I think we agreed, are the first thing a falling house must learn to do without. S. Garrow. He means to look at him, her father said dully. He means to put your beggar in a good room, with good light and 12 courses, and look at him across the silver, and find out in an evening what the shilling men have failed to find in a day. And you will go, both of you, because the alternative is the street by Saturday. He laughed without any pleasure in it. He has caught us very neat. He cannot have you. So he will have the spectacle of you, the baronet's daughter, and her pauper, brought to table to be examined. And if your Gabriel is what he begins to think he is, the rags will not survive one course of it. He lifted his ravaged eyes to her at last. What is he, Rosalind, for God's sake? What have you brought down on us?" "I do not know, Papa," she said, and for the first time it was the whole and naked truth, and saying it aloud frightened her more than any of Garrow's threats. "I am going to find out." She found him by accident, in the end, and not on any step. She had walked half the mews and the length of 2 streets in the noon heat, with her bonnet brim low, asking the careful nothing questions of a woman who does not wish to be seen asking, and the dust had got into her shoes and the back of her neck was damp under her collar, and she had nearly turned for home when she saw, through the open arch of a carrier's yard off the river end, a knot of men at a trestle, and one of them too tall, too still, sitting with his back to her on an upturned barrel. The set of his shoulders stopped her in the gateway. She would have known the line of him in any crowd in England by then, ragged or no. He was not begging. That was the first wrongness. He sat at the trestle among the carters and the porters as one of them, a horn cup of small beer at his elbow, and the men were not jeering him nor moving him on. They were listening to him, leaning in, and one wrote laboriously on a scrap with a stub of pencil, while Gabriel spoke low and even, and the whole attitude of the group was the attitude of men taking instruction from a clerk they trusted. Then the writing man looked up, and saw her in the arch, and said something, and Gabriel turned. For half a breath, before he composed it, his face was not a beggar's face at all. It was the face of a man interrupted at work he had meant to keep private, and then it shuttered, smoothed, went grey-eyed and unhurried, and he rose from the barrel and came toward her across the yard, wiping his clean hands on a rag, as though he had been at some honest labour, and the carters bent back to their cups and let him go without a word. "You should not be here," he said, low, when he reached her. "This is no place for you, and I am no sight for the open street in daylight. You were not on the steps." "No, you knew the asking had begun." She kept her voice down, but it shook. "You knew Garrow's men were out, and you did not come to me. You let me hear it from my own maid. You sat here." She looked past him at the trestle, the pencil, the listening men, "doing whatever this is, while I walked half the parish in the heat, not knowing if my husband had run off the face of the earth. You promised me. You said I should come to you first. How am I to come to you first when you are gone?" Something crossed his face, that quick dark thing, here and gone, and under it, plainly, shame. "You are right," he said. "You are entirely right, and I have no defense but a poor one, which is that I have spent half a year learning to step out of the light the instant a question is asked about me, and the habit is stronger than my better sense. When I heard the men were asking, I did what I have trained myself to do. I disappeared. I did not think how it would look to the one person I had no business disappearing from." He drew a breath. "Forgive me. I am out of practice at being owed an account of myself." "Then, practice," she said. "Garrow has sent us an invitation to dine, Thursday next, at his own table, you and I both, so that he may look at you over the candles and discover what the shilling men could not." She watched his face as she said it, watched for the flinch, and she found it, not in the eyes, which stayed level, but in a single small stillness of the jaw, the look of a man who has heard a gate close behind him. He wrote that he longs to meet the gentleman who has cost him a wife. Gentleman, Gabriel. He used the word like a knife held flat, to show me he had not decided yet whether to turn the edge. Why would a man troubling himself over a beggar choose that word? What does he suspect? And why? Her voice cracked, and she let it. Why do you look, when I say his name, like a man who already knows him? The yard went on around them, oblivious, the creak of harness, a barrel rumbling down a plank, the green river stink riding the warm air, a gull screaming over the wall. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weigh something, weigh it hard, the way a man weighs whether to lance a wound now or let it work a day longer. "Because I do know him," he said at last, very quietly. "I have known of Silas Garrow for 3 years. I came to these steps, Rosalind, in part, not wholly, but in part, because they were his hunting ground before they were yours. Your father's name was on a list I have been keeping. I did not come to court you. I swear that to you, on whatever you will have me swear it. But I did not come to your steps by chance either, and that is a thing I should have told you before I let you put your hand in mine, and I did not, because I am a coward in exactly one particular, and that particular is you. She stepped back from him. The dust grated under her shoe. A list, she said. My father's name on a list. You sat at our door watching us the way you said you watch everyone. Only, it was not everyone. It was us. It was him. And you let me come down in the dark and beg you to marry me, and you said Thursday, by license. And all the while I was the word came up out of the morning's dread fully formed. A move. I was a move on a board you were already playing. No. Garrow said it. This morning, in my father's room, before I knew what he meant. He said a man does not sit 3 days on a baronet's steps for nothing. He said you were wearing a beggar the way a poacher wears the dark. Her breath was coming short and hot. I told him he was wrong. I stood in that room and told him my husband was nothing, had nothing, wanted nothing, and the whole time you had a list in your pocket with my father's ruin written on it. And I was the fool who married it for safety. Rosalind. He did not reach for her this time. He had learnt that much. He stood with his clean hands open at his sides, and his ruined coat hanging off shoulders that had no business inside it, and his grey eyes held her with a steadiness that was its own kind of mercy and its own kind of cruelty. Listen to me, and then judge me, and I will stand to the judgment, whatever it is. I came to watch Garrow. I came in rags, because I had reasons of my own to be no one for a while. Reasons that have nothing to do with you, and everything to do with a name I will tell you tonight if you will hear it. I sat your steps 3 mornings, and I watched a man build a trap around a girl, and I told myself it was none of my affair, that I was an observer, that I had unmade myself precisely so as to owe the world nothing. And then the girl came down through the scullery, in a temper, and asked me my name as though I were a person and not a piece of the scenery, and would not eat her own fear, and offered a stranger in the dirt the only thing she had left in the world. His voice roughened, and I said yes. Not because you were a move, because you were the first true thing I had touched in half a year, and I could not watch that man have you, when it was in my power to put myself between you and him, and call it a marriage. That was not strategy, Rosalind. That was the one wholly selfish act of my disappearance. And I would do it again, tonight. The river ran. The gull cried. She stood in the warm, filthy yard with her wedding-honest husband, and felt the ground she had thought so solid shift beneath her like a deck. And she did not know. That was the horror of it. That was the thing turning cold and sick under her stays. She did not know whether he had told her the truth or only the most beautiful possible shape of a lie, because the one was indistinguishable from the other in a man clever enough to lose his whole name on purpose. What name? She said, when she could. You will tell me tonight, you say. Tell me now, in this yard, with the carters listening if they like. What is the name Garrow is going to find before I do? Because he will he not, by Thursday, over his 12 courses. He will say it aloud at his own table, and watch my face to see if I knew it. Do not let him be the one to tell me, Gabriel. Whatever else you have done, do not let me hear my own husband's name first from the mouth of the man who means to destroy us both. For a moment she thought he would. His mouth opened. The word was there. Behind his teeth, she could see the weight of it sitting on him, half a year heavy. And then a boy came pelting through the carrier's arch with a paper twist of news from the riverside, and the men at the trestle gave a shout over something. A wager settled, a barge come in, and Gabriel's whole body did the thing she had watched it do in the mews lane, the smooth instant fold into stillness, the beggar dropping over the man like a shutter. And when the noise had passed he said only, in a voice gone flat and careful, not here. Not in the open, with a hunt up and shilling men in every yard from here to the Strand. Tonight I will come to the Mews at 11, when the house sleeps, and I will tell you the whole of it, the name, the list, the half-year, all of it, and you may decide then what you have married, and I will hold to your deciding. But I will not give Garrow's men the satisfaction of my surname carried back to him on a boy's tongue for a sixpence." He looked at her, and the grief in his face was naked again, the same grief she had seen when he said last week there was no one it could hurt but me. 11. "Will you wait until 11? I have waited 2 days to learn the name of the man I am bound to past undoing," she said. "I can wait until 11. "But Gabriel," she gathered her cloak though the day was hot, gathered it the way one braces, "if you are not in that Mews at 11, if you disappear from me one more time, then you will have answered the question yourself, and I will not need your name to know what you are." She turned. Garrow at least had the courtesy to come early. She left him in the yard. She did not look back, and the not looking cost her more than any look had ever done. He did not come at 11. She stood in the Mews from the first stroke of it, in the warm, thick dark behind the stable, with her cloak unfastened, and her mother's pearls knotted again into her handkerchief, like a charm against the worst. And she counted the quarters off the church clock at the lane's end, and the swifts had gone to their eaves, and the bats come out to stitch the violet gaps between the chimneys, and the summer night sat heavy and breathless over the Mews, with a far-off mutter of thunder behind the river haze. The half, the 3/4, midnight. He did not come. And at 1/4 midnight, when she had begun to taste the bitter certainty that he had answered her question in the cruelest way a man could, a carriage turned into the head of the lane. A fine carriage, lamps lit, the horses stepping high and fresh, and stopped. And the door opened, and it was not Gabriel who climbed down into the lamplight, but Silas Garrow, hatless in evening dress, with a folded paper in his hand, and the card-player's smile sitting on his beautiful mouth like something he had put on for the occasion. "Mrs. Gabriel." He did not seem surprised to find her there. That was the first cold thing. "Forgive the hour. I find I could not wait for Thursday after all. Curiosity is a disease, and I have it badly tonight. I have spent rather more than a string of shillings since this morning, and I have, I think, run your husband to the root at last." He came toward her, unhurried across the cobbles, and the lamplight slid along the paper in his hand. "Do you know, it is the prettiest thing I have turned up in 20 years of turning up men's secrets. I almost did not believe it. I had my fellow confirm it twice." He stopped a yard from her and tilted his head, and in his eyes was that look she had marked at her father's door, the look a man gives a lock that has proved cleverer than he supposed. Only now the lock was open. "You truly do not know, do you? Look at your face. You married him, and you bedded down 2 nights a wedded woman, and you do not even now know whose ring you have not been given." He laughed, soft and delighted. "Oh, this is rich. This is richer than the foreclosure would have been. Shall I tell you, Mrs. Gabriel? Shall I tell you the name your loyal pauper has been so very careful to keep behind his teeth?" "You will tell me nothing," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to, because there was a kind of calm at the very bottom of terror, a flat, cold floor you reached at last when you had fallen far enough. "Whatever you have bought tonight, Mr. Garrow, you have bought to use against me, and I will not stand in a dark lane and take it from your hand like alms. If my husband has a name, I will have it from my husband." "Your husband," Garrow said, "is not coming. I passed his lodging, shall we call it, the charitable word, on my way here. He is otherwise engaged." Something flickered in the smile, something that turned it from delight to a thing with an edge. You see, that is the other half of what my shillings bought tonight. Not only who he is, but that he is, at this present hour, exactly where I should most wish him to be, and you most wish him not. And there is not a thing in the world that you, a beggar's wife with a falling roof and a borrowed cloak, can do to alter it. He held the folded paper up between two fingers, and the lamp made the wax of its seal glow red as a coal, and on it, pressed deep and unmistakable into the grey, she saw the device, a coronet, and under the coronet, a swan rising from reeds, the seal of no beggar, the seal of no gentleman, the seal of a man who stood, as the warm glass of her father's morning room had whispered 4 days and a lifetime ago, very high above her own. "Now," said Silas Garrow gently, into the breathless, thunder-haunted dark, "shall we discuss the terms on which I keep what I know to myself, Your Grace?" The word landed in the breathless dark like a stone dropped down a well, and Rosalind heard it strike bottom somewhere far below her ribs. "Your Grace." Garrow let it hang in the lamplight between them, his beautiful mouth curved, the red wax of the seal glowing at the end of his lifted fingers. And he watched her face, the way a man watches a fuse he has just touched a coal to. She would not give him the explosion. She stood with the handkerchief and its knot of pearls twisted to a rope in her fist, and she made her face a shut door, and inside the shut door something tore clean across. Because it fit. That was the unbearable thing. It fit every wrongness she had been swallowing for 4 days. The clean hands. The standing up when she came near. The witness who touched his hat to a pauper. The soap that smelled of cedar under the road dust. I have spent a great deal of effort being no one. The whole peaceful labor of his disappearance, half a year of it, the unmaking of a name. And she had thought it grief, or shame, or some honest man's flight from honest trouble, and all the while it had been this. A coronet under the rags, a swan rising out of the reeds of his lowness, and a list in his pocket with her father's ruin written on it. He had played her from the first warm morning. He had sat his post at the foot of her father's steps, with a title sewn into the lining of his disguise, and he had watched a clever man build a trap around her, and when she came down through the scullery in a temper, and offered a stranger in the dirt the only thing she had left, he had said Thursday, by license, not to save her. But because a great lord wanting to move unseen through a city could find no better cloak in all of London than a wife who believed him nothing. She had married a duke and called it a wall against the world, and she had been the last to know that her wall was a man wearing her for the dark. "You have gone very still," Garrow observed, pleased. "I find the silence answers me more truly than any speech could. You did not know." "I know that you are standing in a mews at midnight," Rosalind said, waving a piece of paper you have paid a great deal to get, and that men who have paid a great deal for a thing are generally desperate to be told it was worth the money. "So tell me, Mr. Garrow, tell me your bargain. You did not come here to share a curiosity with me out of fellow feeling." The smile did not waver, but something behind it sharpened. A roll of thunder came up slow behind the river haze, and the horses at the lane's head shifted in their traces, and the warm air had gone thick and metal-tasting, the way it does before the sky lets go. "No," he agreed. "I came to make you an offer, which is more than I generally trouble to do for a woman I have already lost." He turned the sealed paper once in his fingers. "Your husband is a duke. The Duke of Avonmere, if you would have the whole of it, 25 years old, master of 2 of the prettiest estates in England, and these 3 years the most spoken of vanished man in the kingdom. The clubs say he went mad with grief. The dowagers say he ran off with an opera singer. The truth, which I had to spend rather more than a singer's price to learn, is plainer and stranger than either. He took off his name like a coat and went down into the gutter on purpose. And the gutter he chose, out of all the gutters in this great filthy city, was the one at the foot of your father's steps." He tilted his head. "Has it occurred to you to wonder why? You will tell me regardless. Because of me, your grace. He said it gently, almost kindly, and there was a relish in it that turned her stomach. 3 years ago I held the notes on a young gentleman named Harry Vane. A friend of your husband's, a foster brother. The records would have it, raised in the same nursery, beloved as a true one. Mr. Vane gamed beyond his means, as young gentlemen will, and came to me, as young gentlemen do, and I lent, as is my trade. And when he could not pay, I did what the law allowed, and not 1 farthing more. The smile thinned to its edge. He went into the Fleet owing me £400. He came out, eventually, owing nothing, his health spent, and his wits with it. And he lives now in a quiet house in the north, on your husband's charity, knowing no one's face from 1 hour to the next. The Duke of Avonmere holds me to account for that. He has spent half a year in rags hunting the proof that my lending was usury beyond the legal rate. Which it was, Mrs. Gabriel. I am very good at my trade, and very good is generally a little against the law. He spread his hands. And there it is. The whole pretty shape of it. Your husband did not come to your steps for you. He came for me. You were the door he happened to walk through. The thunder broke nearer, and the first fat drops came down warm and slow into the dust, raising the smell of wet stone and crushed mint, and Rosalind stood in the beginning of the summer rain, and felt every prop she had leaned on these 4 days give way at once. You were the door he happened to walk through. She had said almost the same words to Gabriel in the carrier's yard, flung them at him as an accusation, and he had not denied the shape of them. He had only dressed them in something beautiful. You were the first true thing I had touched in half a year. How easily a man who could shed his entire name could shed the truth of a sentence and leave the lovely sound of it standing. He had used her to come and go from her father's house unmarked. He had used the marriage to bind himself near his quarry, past any footman's chasing off. And tonight, when the hunt was up and the last of his proof within reach, he had let her stand 2 hours in a dark mews, counting the quarters like a fool. Because a wife waiting in a lane was a small price beside the ruin of the man who had broken his Harry. She had been a move on his board from the first morning to this one, and the only thing she had got for it was a name she could not even speak aloud without the rain washing it off her tongue. And your offer, she heard herself say, very flat, very far away, is generous, considering. Garrow stepped closer, under the lip of the stable eave, out of the quickening wet, so that the lamplight caught the rain shining on his shoulders. Avonmere has wronged me. He has spent 6 months and a great deal of patience assembling a case against me that, if it were laid before the right men, would cost me my livelihood and possibly my liberty. I should very much like that case in my own hands. You, his wife, have his confidence, his lodging, his comings and goings. Bring me the papers he has gathered. They will be with that grey solicitor of his, Pelham, the one who touches his hat, and I will tear up every note I hold against your father, forgive the September debt, return the Hampshire mortgage, and trouble your house no more. Your roof is saved, your father is whole, and you are free of me forever. He smiled. All it costs you is loyalty to a man who married you for a coat. The rain came down harder, drumming the cobbles, sheeting off the stable roof in a warm grey curtain, and Rosalind lifted her chin into it and let it run down her face, where it could hide whatever her face was doing. You have misjudged one thing, she said. I rarely misjudge. You have misjudged who is the more dangerous to you tonight, the Duke with his papers, or his wife with her grievance. You think because he has wronged me I will sell him to you. You think a betrayed woman is a purchasable woman. She took a step toward him, and the rain ran off her bonnet brim in a thin, bright string. But I have been bought and sold across a breakfast table by my own father, Mr. Garrow, and weighed at 3,000 a year by you, and now, it seems, taken up off a doorstep and worn like a cloak by a duke. I have been 3 men's currency in a single week. I find I have no wish at all to become a 4th man's coin, even to spite the 3rd. Her voice shook. and she let it. So no, I will not bring you his papers. Whatever he has done to me, you broke a man's wits over £400, and I will not be the hand that hides it. Sell my father's roof. I have told you once tonight already. It will not buy you me, and it will not buy you Harry Vane back his reason either. For a long moment, Garrow only looked at her through the falling rain, and the appreciation came back into his face, that card player's respect she had marked at her father's door, and she hated it more than his contempt. What a waste, he said softly, that you were not born a man, or born rich. You would have been a far worthier opponent than your husband, who at least had the decency to play me at a game I understood. He stepped back, and the rain took him, and he reached for the carriage door. I will give you until Thursday to discover that loyalty is a luxury, and luxuries are the first thing a falling house does without. Yes, you have said. She was shaking all over now, with cold and rain and the great tearing emptiness where her certainties had been. Go home, Mr. Garrow. I shall. He set one foot on the step and paused, and looked back at her with the rain silvering his beautiful empty face. Do give his grace my compliments. Tell him I always did wonder where the proud beggar had got to. And tell him, the edge slid out from under the smile, naked for one heartbeat, tell him Harry Vane sends his regards, if he can be brought to remember what regards are. That should sting prettily, coming from his own wife's mouth. And it was that, the small deliberate cruelty of it, the using of a broken man as a knife to slide between her ribs and her husband's, that snapped something in the dark behind the stable into sudden violent motion. Garrow. The voice came from the head of the lane, behind the carriage, low and carrying, and entirely without its beggar's idleness, and Rosalind turned in the rain and saw a tall figure come out of the grey curtain at a walk that was almost a run, and her heart leapt and broke in the same beat, because it was Gabriel, and Gabriel was a wreck. The ruined coat hung half off one shoulder, torn clean at the seam. There was a dark wet mark high on his cheekbone that the rain kept washing thin and red, and he moved with the careful set of a man whose ribs have been recently and thoroughly disagreed with. But he moved fast, and he moved straight for the carriage, and the two grooms who had been holding the horses' heads took one look at his face and stepped well back. You set your men on me in a doorway off Water Lane, Gabriel said, reaching them, the rain running off him in ropes. 3 of them, to keep me from this muse for an hour, so that you might have her alone. He was breathing hard, and under the wet his grey eyes had gone to something Rosalind had never seen in them, not on the steps, not in the yard, a cold, clean fury with a floor of grief beneath it. An hour, Garrow, you could not even win cleanly. You had to buy yourself an hour with 3 pairs of fists, because you knew that if I stood beside her you had nothing. I had the truth, Garrow said, unhurried, 1 foot still on the carriage step, which I have just spent on her, with interest. She knows what you are now, Avonmere. She knows why you came to her steps, and what she was good for. I rather think I have done in an hour what your fists will struggle to undo in a marriage. He smiled. How does it feel, Your Grace, to be unmasked by the man you have spent half a year unmasking? Gabriel stopped a yard from him. The rain hammered the cobbles between them. And then, slowly, he reached inside the ruined coat, past the torn seam, to some pocket sewn flat against his side that no footman's frisking had ever found, and drew out a packet of papers folded in oilskin against the wet. And he held it up, and even in the streaming dark Rosalind saw Garrow's eyes go to it, and saw, for the first time in 4 days, the beautiful face change all the way through. You think Pelham has the case, Gabriel said. You sent your men to follow him tonight, did you not, while your other men held me? Because you reasoned that if you could not have me, you might at least have the papers. A sound plan. It is the plan I expected of you, which is why Pelham has been carrying a satchel of blank foolscap up and down the Strand since 9 o'clock. And why the case itself has been here, he touched the oilskin, against my own ribs, where your hirelings were too busy with my face to think of looking." He turned then and held the packet out, not to Garrow, but across the rain to Rosalind. "Take it. Open it. You above anyone have earned the reading of it." She did not move to take it. "Why? Because I am tired of you learning what I am from other men's mouths." His voice cracked on it, and the rain hid nothing now. She could see the grief working under the fury, raw and exhausted. "Garrow told you the shape of it tonight, and I have no doubt he made it ugly, because he is good at ugly. Read it yourself. Read what he is. And then, when this is finished, I will tell you the rest. The party does not know and cannot sell you, and you may judge the whole of me at once, the worst with the best, and have done." Her hands came up of their own accord. The oilskin was warm from his body and slick with rain, and she peeled it back with fingers that would barely obey her, and tilted the topmost sheet to the lamplight, and read the first line her eye fell on in a clerk's plain hand. Item, that the said Silas Garrow did knowingly advance moneys at 440 in the 100, contrary to the statute, to no fewer than 19 gentlemen of this city, of whom the cases of Vane, Ashworth, and Pell are here particularly set down. 19, she said. 19 that I could prove. There are more. Gabriel had turned back to Garrow, and his voice had gone very quiet, which she had learned by now was the most dangerous thing it did. Harry was only the first I knew of, because Harry was mine. But once a man begins to look, Garrow, he finds the others. Ashworth, who is in the bench still. Old Mr. Lindley, whose girls take in plain sewing now in a back room in Pimlico. The Tarrant boy. 19 households you have hollowed out from the inside at 440 in the 100 and called it your trade. He took a step closer, and Garrow, for the first time, took one back. I did not need to marry your way to your roof, Fairfax, nor to ruin you in the ordinary fashion. I needed only to stand up in a certain room before certain men with these papers in my hand and your name on my lips, and you would be finished. Your money called in, your fine house emptied, your liberty in question. A duke's word, Garrow. You spent 20 years learning how little a poor man's word is worth. You never troubled to learn the weight of a rich one, because you never expected to find one sitting in a gutter eating the dog's meat. The rain ran. Garrow's beautiful face had gone the color of the tallow her father had turned at his own breakfast table, and his hand, she saw, had closed white on the edge of the carriage door. You would not, he said. The scandal. Your own name dragged through it. A duke who played beggar, who married a baronet's bankrupt chit off a doorstep. You would not survive the telling of it in society any better than I. There it is. Gabriel almost smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see, all grief and no warmth. You have understood me at last. You think I will hold my tongue to save my reputation, because you cannot conceive of a man who would spend his name to ruin you. But I spent my whole name once already, Garrow, and walked away lighter for it, and lived half a year happier in rags than I ever lived in ermine. Do you imagine I will hesitate now, with these papers in my hand, and my wife standing in your reign, over a little drawing-room scandal? He let the question sit. I will lay this before the magistrates on Monday morning. Unless, Garrow repeated. His tongue came out and wet his lips. Unless every note you hold against Cornelius Fairfax is in my solicitor's hands by noon tomorrow, cancelled and witnessed, the September debt, the Hampshire mortgage, the bills you bought up at a discount to tighten the screw, and unless you withdraw, tonight and in writing, from this city and this manner of trade for good. Pelham has the deed drawn already. You will sign it in your own carriage, by your own lamp, before you sleep. Or you will sit before the bench on Monday and answer for 19 households, beginning with Harry's. Gabriel's voice dropped to almost nothing under the drumming rain. I am giving you a door, Garrow. It is more of a door than you gave any of them. Take it. For a long, streaming, thunderous moment, Silas Garrow stood with one foot on his carriage step and the wreck of his certainty plain on his beautiful face, and Rosalind watched the card player calculate his ruined hand and find, at the bottom of it, nothing. He looked at the oilskin packet in her hands. He looked at the dark, wet mark on Gabriel's cheek, and the torn seam, and the cold grey eyes that did not so much as flicker. And something in him folded, not gracefully, not with any nobility, but the way a paper folds, all at once along a line it has been resisting.
Pelham may bring his deed to Bruton Street within the hour, he said, and his voice had gone flat and old. I will sign it. The notes will be with him by noon. He climbed into the carriage and gathered the door to, and paused with it half shut, and looked out at the two of them standing close together in the rain, the ruined Duke and the borrowed cloaked girl, with an expression she could not name, but might, in a better man, have been the beginning of shame. You will have a strange marriage of it, he said. A wife who married you for your nothing, and a husband who married her for his hunt. I almost pity you both the untangling. The door clicked shut. Drive on. The carriage pulled away up the lane, the lamps swinging, the high-stepping horses throwing up sheets of rainwater. And then, the mews was empty of everything but the two of them, and the downpour, and the long, bright string of water pouring off the stable eave, and the church clock at the lane's end struck the half after midnight into the dark. And Rosalind, with 19 ruined households in her wet hands, and a husband she did not know the name of bleeding quietly beside her, felt the great held breath of 4 days go out of her all at once, and turned on him. For your hunt! Her voice tore loose at last, all the held terror coming out as fury, because fury was the only safe shape for it. He sat there and told me I was a door you walked through, and you stood in this lane and you said it back to him. She was the way to your roof, Fairfax. To his face, Gabriel. As though it were a thing to be proud of. So it is true. I was a move. You came to my father's steps for Garrow, and you married me to come and go unwatched. And tonight you left me standing in the dark 2 hours, while you finished the work I was only ever a piece of. I left you standing in the dark, Gabriel said, because 3 of his men put me on the stones of a doorway off Water Lane and sat on me for an hour, and it took me that long to persuade them to let me up. The rain ran red and thin off his jaw. I was coming to you. I have been coming to you since 11. I would have crawled the length of Water Lane on my hands to be in this mews by midnight, and I nearly did. Do not, please, do not give me the 1 hour I could not help as proof of the thing I am most afraid you believe. And what am I to believe? She was weeping now, she discovered. The rain and the tears, all one warm flood down her face. Garrow had a name in an hour. I have had 4 days, and a wedding ring I was never given. And I still do not know what to call you. Everyone in London knows more of my husband than I do. The cook called you a duke down on his luck for a joke, Gabriel. And she was righter than my own marriage lines. So tell me, you said you would. You said tonight, the whole of it. There is no boy with a sixpence now, no shilling men, no carters listening. There is only the rain. Tell me your name. He stood very still in the downpour, and the fight went out of him. And what was left when it went was so naked that she nearly looked away.
Gabriel, he said. That much was always true. Gabriel Renford. And the rest of it that the world hangs on me, Duke of Avonmere, and a string of lesser things after it, that I have not said aloud in half a year, and do not much like the taste of even now. He drew a breath that caught somewhere damaged in his side. Harry Vane was my foster brother. We were raised in the same nursery. My father took him in when his own people came to nothing, and he was the better of the two of us at everything that mattered, and the worse at cards. And Garrow found him at 19, and bled him white, and broke him in the Fleet. And what came out is not the boy who taught me to ride. He does not know me when I visit. He asks the nurse who the gentleman is. His voice went rough, and stopped, and started again. I could have crushed Garrow as a duke, openly, in a month. But a duke moving openly warns his quarry, and Garrow is clever, and I wanted not merely to ruin him, but to take him to law for all 19, and for that I needed proof no clerk would sell to the Duke of Avonmere, but any clerk would sell to a curious nobody in a coffee-house. So I unmade myself. I took off the name and went down, and I will not pretend to you it was all penance. I told you in the yard it was the most peaceful labor of my life. Being no one, owing the world nothing, watched by no one, expected by no one. He looked at her, and the rain ran down his ruined face. And then a girl came down through a scullery in a temper, and asked the nobody his name as though he were a person. And the peace went out of being no one, all at once, that morning, because for the first time in half a year there was someone I wanted to be someone for. You should have told me. It came out small now, the fury spent, only the hurt left bare under it. Before the license, before I put my hand in yours, you let me marry a stranger believing I knew the worst of him, that he was poor, when the truth was I knew nothing of him at all. I know. It is the one cowardice I confessed to you in the yard, and it is the truest thing I have said in half a year. He lifted one hand, slowly, and this time he did not let it fall. He laid it against the side of her wet face, his palm warm and broad and shaking very slightly, the clean hand she had returned to again and again in the Mews Lane 4 days and a lifetime ago. I told myself I withheld it to protect the case. That was a lie, I told myself. I withheld it because the moment you knew, you would stop seeing the man and start seeing the Duke, the way everyone has seen the Duke since I was 8 years old, and my father went to his rest, and the whole weight of a name I never asked for came down on a boy. You looked at me, Rosalind, in that Mews, the way no one had looked at me in 20 years. Not at what I was worth, at what I was. I could not bear to trade it back for a coronet a single hour before I had to. The rain was easing. The thunder had rolled away east over the river, and the warm summer wet came down soft now, almost gentle, pattering in the leaves of the herb pot someone had trodden, and on the cobbles, and on her bonnet, and she stood with his hand against her face, and felt the 4 days' wall she had built, first against her father, then against Garrow, last and most desperately against this man, come quietly to pieces in her chest, not knocked down but simply set aside, no longer needed. You are bleeding, she said. Yes, 3 of them. And you came anyway. I told you on the stones the first night, he said. I am afraid of nothing your father can use against you. I find I am afraid of a great many things where you are concerned, but his men in a doorway were never going to be one of them. The ghost of the not-quite smile moved at the corner of his battered mouth. Though I will own, they made a fair argument for staying down. And there it was again, dropped so lightly into the wreck of the night, the dry exact turn of it, and Rosalind heard herself give that same startled, cracked laugh she had given over the river pie, the laugh she had not meant to make, and it came out half a sob, and she pressed her wet glove to her mouth and could not catch it back and did not try. You are impossible, she said. I am told it runs in the family. Avonmeres have been impossible since the conquest. There is a chapel full of impossible Avonmeres in Hampshire, with their impossible swans carved over every one of them. He drew her in then, carefully, favouring the side that pained him, and she let herself be drawn, her cheek against the wet ruin of his coat, his chin against her sodden bonnet, the rain coming down warm and soft all around them in the empty lamplit Mews. Rosalind, I came to your steps for Garrow. That is true, and I will not unsay it, because you have had enough of men who unsay their truths to suit you. But I married you for you. I knew the difference in myself the moment I said I will into that cold stone room, and meant it past anything the case required. You were never a move. You were the thing that made me remember there was a man under the disguise worth digging back up. His arms tightened. I love you. I have no business saying it first, having deceived you longest, but I find I cannot stand in this rain 1 minute more without your knowing it. Whatever you decide of me, Duke or Beggar, or the impossible muddle of both, that much is finished and recorded and cannot be scratched out, exactly as you wanted it. I love you. She lifted her face from his coat. The rain had washed the blood thin on his cheek, and his grey eyes were waiting on her answer the way they had waited on her proposal in the dark. That quiet, terrible attention. The man who watched everyone, watching only her. I married a beggar to defy my father, she said, and I find I have got a duke instead, which is a far worse defiance, and I expect Papa will never recover from it. Her own voice shook and steadied. I do not know yet how to be a duchess, Gabriel Renford. I know how to come out through a scullery in a temper, and how to refuse a contract, and how to stand in a dark lane and not be sold. I do not know the other thing at all. She put her wet hand up over his against her face. But I would rather learn it beside the man who would not eat the dog's meat than be safe forever behind any wall. So yes, I will have you, the worst with the best, all at once, exactly as you said. The tears came again, and she laughed through them. I love you too, you impossible man. I think I have since the pie. He kissed her then, in the soft summer rain, in the empty mews, with the lamp guttering at the corner, and the church clock ticking toward one and the whole sleeping city unaware that a beggar and a baronet's daughter had just become, very quietly, the Duke and Duchess of Avonmere, in the truest sense the word aloud, and it was a long kiss, and an unhurried one, and it tasted of rain, and of the river, and of every withheld thing finally let go, and when at last it ended he rested his forehead against hers, and breathed out half a year of being no one, and was, for the first time since he was a boy, entirely glad to be found. Her father took the news as a man takes a reprieve at the foot of the scaffold, badly at first, with much choking and one near faint into the morning-room chair. And then, when Pelham arrived at noon with the cancelled notes and the Hampshire mortgage signed back into the family, and Garrow's witnessed withdrawal under his arm, with a kind of dazed and weeping gratitude that was almost worse to witness than his cruelty had been. A duke, he kept saying, turning the deed of release over in his trembling hands at the very table where he had slid the marriage contract across the linen at her plate. A duke, on my own steps. Eating the... Rosalind, the footman chased him off. Twice a week. I gave Thomas an extra shilling at Lady Day for his diligence in chasing off. He put the deed down and pressed his handkerchief to his eyes. He will think me the greatest fool in England. He thinks you a man who was frightened and in debt, Rosalind said, more gently than she had thought she had it in her to be. The July light came down hot and yellow through the long window, over the area steps where the warm stone held only sunlight now, and a sparrow at a crumb. And he thinks, I am sorry to tell you, Papa, that you have a carrying voice. He heard the whole of that breakfast through the open glass. The contract, and Garrow's price, and what you said my face had earned us in 2 seasons. She watched her father flinch, and did not spare him, but did not press it either. He married me partly because he could not sit on a public stone and listen to a man sell his daughter and call it none of his affair. So you may take what comfort you like from that. Your unkindness was at least useful to someone. Sir Cornelius wept a little more, and was forgiven a little, though not all at once and not all the way, which was as it should be. Some debts are paid in coin, and some in years. They were married again in September, properly, this time, in the impossible Avonmere chapel in Hampshire, with the swans carved over the door, and the late summer roses blowing in through the open arch, and Suki crying into the good lace, and Harry Vane brought down from the north to sit in the front pew in a clean coat, not knowing whose wedding it was, but smiling at the music all the same, and reaching once for Gabriel's sleeve, and asking the nurse who the kind gentleman was, and Gabriel answering, "Lo," without a tremor, "an old friend, Harry, the oldest you have," and turning his face away from the company until he had it in hand. It was a summer wedding, as the first had been. Rosalind wore her mother's pearls, and a year on a hot bright July morning, very like the one that had begun it all, the Duchess of Avonmere came out through the kitchen passage of the great house in Hampshire, old habits being slow to mend, with a heel of new bread in her hand, and found her husband sitting on the warm stone of the south steps, with his long legs stretched before him, and his eyes shut against the glare. Exactly, precisely, as she had first seen him at the foot of her father's area railing a year and a lifetime ago. "You are on my steps again," she said. He opened his grey eyes, clear and entirely unhurried, and took her in, the muslin, the bread, the curve of her against the morning light, with the calm of a man who had nowhere in the world he was required to be, and nowhere else he wished to be either. "I am on the public stones at the foot of your steps," he corrected gravely. "There is a difference, and your footman and I have discussed it at length." He patted the warm stone beside him. "Sit, it is warmer than it looks. And you may share your bread with a poor man, if charity still moves you, though I warn you I am particular. I will not eat what is meant for the dogs. You are the most particular beggar in England." She sat and broke the bread and gave him half, and the smell of it was warm and yeasty in the sun. And somewhere a blackbird was going through its whole repertoire in the limes. And the roses her mother would have loved climbed the warm brick all the way to the chapel where the swans were. "Cook says so. She says you'd sooner go hungry than humble." "Cook," said Gabriel, biting into his half, "has known me longer than you have, and is a romantic, and once described me as a duke down on his luck with worse linen, which I am reliably informed travelled the length of 2 counties. He slid his clean hand across the warm stone and laced his fingers through hers, the way he had taken her cold hand on the dark steps and closed the treaty of it a year ago, only warm now, and sure, and given freely. "I have decided to forgive her. A man should forgive the people who saw the truth of him before he was ready to be seen." He glanced sidelong at her, and the not-quite smile came, and this time it was all warmth and no secret left under it at all, even when they put it about at a wedding. Below them the great park ran green and gold to the haze of the lake, where the impossible Avonmere swans were rising out of the reeds into the summer light, and Rosalind leaned her head on the shoulder of the man she had married to defy her father, and kept, because she could not, in the end, do otherwise, and ate her bread in the warm yellow morning, with her hand in his. The only currency she had ever wanted, spent at last on the one thing that could not be sold. If this story warmed your heart, settle in by the fire with us again. Subscribe and tell me below which moment was your favorite. The midnight proposal, on the steps, or the bread, shared in the sun. There's always another tale, waiting at Adrian's fireside.